Okay. First of all, I want to thank you for coming down to be a part of this Chicago State University's Tuskegee Airman Oral History Project. And our guest today is Second Lieutenant Roy Martis Chappell. He's the second lieutenant
Yes.
in the 477 Bombardment Group?
Bombardment Group.
Great. First of all, our first question is, can you describe your family life during the 1930s and the 40s? What was it like for you?
Well, I was born in a small town in Kentucky that had less than 2,000 people. And I went to a one-room schoolhouse for 1 year. And then we moved to a larger town called Pineville, Kentucky. And I went to a four-room schoolhouse. And at the end of the second grade, during the second grade, my father got a job in Monroe, Michigan. And we moved to Monroe, Michigan. And the thing about it there is I'm moving from a segregated school system into an integrated school system. And I finished my high school education in Monroe, and out of a class of 250, I was the only black in my graduating class. In high school, I finished in the top 10% of my class to graduate. I lettered in track and in football. For the last 2 years, I was a high point man on the track team. I ran both hurdles, high and low hurdles, and broad jump and the relay. And when I have a sister and one brother in our family, and it was the typical kind of family being raised in us. Monroe was like a small town too, and I enjoyed. I've always had an enjoyable life. I enjoyed my childhood. I enjoyed the time in high school, and when I left high school, my father died my senior year in high school, and I always wanted to go to college. I had aspirations of being a teacher. And since I was from Kentucky, I went to Kentucky State, and I enrolled in Kentucky State as a student, trying to get a degree in chemistry. And I was there until I was finally called into the Air Force.
Well, just to go back a little bit, when you were in high school, what was it like growing up there? I mean, how was race relations for the family back then, especially in the segregated school there?
Well, in Monroe, in Michigan, the schools were integrated, and it was very pleasant. We got along very well. I only had one incident that was outstanding to me. Excuse me. The football team had a game near a suburb of Detroit, and we had to go out for lunch, and we were going to stay over that part of the night to see a night football game in Detroit, and we had to go and get lunch somewhere, and the team split and went to two different restaurants, and I went into one, and the coach came up and told me to go down the street because the owner of the restaurant didn't want me to eat in his particular restaurant, so I went down the street. The thing about that is that the track team was almost in the same type of situation, but the coach in that situation said, no, if my players can't eat here, none of them can eat here, and he took the whole team out, and that was one of the kind of things that happened then. But you were always having to live and understand the rules of these two societies, because most every summer, we went back to Kentucky for a vacation because our grandparents and other relatives were there. And we'd get on an integrated train in Monroe and go to Cincinnati, Ohio, get off the train in Cincinnati, walk across the station, and get on a segregated train. The only thing that happened to me is that I walked across the station, but the whole kind of dynamics of how people were treating you and what was expected was entirely different. And that was something that I think the youngsters need to understand now, that you had to be confronted with this kind of thing. And you can imagine what this would do to a person that had a fragile ego about coming out of one thing where you're treated one way and going another place where you're treated quite entirely different.
You're talking about your education. You were going to Kentucky State. How did you become a part of the military? What drove you in that direction?
I received, at that time you were registered and you'd get a call up from your draft board. My draft board sent me a letter, told me that I had to come in they were about to send me into the military. And since I was in school in Kentucky, I heard about they were taking folks into the Air Force. I didn't want to go into the military because most of the black fellows that were going in were ending up in the Army. And I didn't have any idea. I never wanted to carry that heavy rifle or sleeping on the ground. So I applied to take the exam for the Air Corps to become a cadet. And I passed the exam. Then after, in my third year there, I was called up to go into the cadet corps, and we left Kentucky State and went down to Biloxi, Mississippi for my basic training.
What were you initially trained for?
We went through basic training. We came back and went through a pre-flight kind of training that lasted a few months. And then we were sent out to Tuskegee Airfield, and I was trained as a pilot. I started out being trained as a pilot. I went through the first stage of pilot training, which is called primary, when you're solo in primary and you do all the different kind of training and things that you learn. And I went through the second stage, which is called basic, and got through that successfully. The only incidents I had in the basic there was that one day we were flying and the clouds cover was very low and didn't have very much visibility, and I got lost. And the rules were when you get lost and you don't know how to get back to the base, you find a field somewhere and land. So I went down and you buzz these fields and look at them and things, and finally I found one and I landed in it. And you call and tell them find out where I am, tell them where I am and everything. And they told me they couldn't come and get me that day. They had to come and get me the next day. So they did. And the thing about it is that the instructors couldn't understand how I got that airplane in that field without damaging it or anything, because they couldn't take off from that field. They had to pull it out and take it somewhere else to get off. And then when I got into the advanced phase of the training, I did what they call washout. The elimination rate in pilot training was somewhere between maybe 35, 40, 50% of the people that started in the class did not finish. And there were a number of reasons given for that. So after I washed out, there had been a lot of agitation. There was agitation about the whole thing about the Tuskegee. It was called a Tuskegee experience. It was designed to fail because people didn't believe that black people could fly. And I was being sent to the navigation school down in Hondo, Texas. There had been one class there before my class. I joined a class there. There were about 32 of us in that particular class. And it was a large base that didn't do anything but train cadets to be navigators. We were the only black class on a field that must have had anywhere between maybe 500, 800 white cadets. We had our own separate classroom, our own separate barrack where we stayed. And then we always flew as a separate individual class group. And they told us that there was a gap between the first navigation class and the second navigation class because the first class didn't understand celestial navigation. Celestial navigation has to do with, it's not like today that all you have to do is push a button and you can find out where you are and all those kind of things. That time, if you're flying at night, you had to use the stars in order to find out where you were and your location. And you had to learn all the constellations in the sky. And we had something that was called a sextant that was used to what they call shoot a star. And that would give you an angle on the star, and you would plot it using your books and things, and you could find your location. And that was celestial navigation. It was, well, they said it was difficult, but we were able to get through it. And we finished the celestial navigation course, and we were commissioned second lieutenants.
Now, you were talking about, what was the total number of your class size? And then another question I had was, were you aware of the Tuskegee experience prior to joining, or did you hear about it? Or?
Yeah, because when I was in the pilot training, I trained at Tuskegee, and I was training that, they have a number of classes training at the same time in the different phases of the training program. And at that particular time, fellows that were getting ready to go overseas were having to transition into the P-40s. So they were on the base too. Tuskegee was an unusual place because they had all types of airplanes flying there at one time. They had P-40s flying. They had what was called the AT-6, was the advanced trainer flying. They had the basic trainer flying off of that particular field. And that's 3 different kinds of airplanes they're flying at one time then. Plus the fact they had brought in some pilots from the field artillery, and they were teaching them what they call little grasshopper airplanes, which was a little small airplane like a Cub, because they were the observers for the field artillery. So they had all these airplanes flying in the same traffic pattern at all these different kind of speeds and things. So I was, there when this was going on, so I was very aware of when the fellows were going overseas and the training they were getting to go overseas and the delays that they kept getting about going overseas. At one time, they wanted to send them to just patrol and look for submarines. But people said, no, they shouldn't do that. They've trained to be fighter pilots. They need to go into fight. And so that's what finally happened. From the agitation that they had from all the different civil rights organizations and the black newspapers in that time was the thing that brought all these things to happen.
Did your class hear about the original 99th and
oh, yeah,
some of the stories that you might have heard about that group?
We were in constant touch because fellows had we knew them because we'd done some training with them and that particular kind of thing. So we were very well aware of everything that was happening to them, all the time, everything that was going on. So we were always really in touch, and it was a back and forth kind of thing. So we knew everything was happening.
Were there any morale problems on the base during your training period? I mean, how?
Well, there were always in the navigation kind of training. There weren't many kind of not morale problems there because we were as a group. We were together as a group, and we knew what we wanted to do, and we just, I guess, more than likely because the fellows were highly motivated, they were able to focus on what they had to do. And by staying focused, you didn't get sidetracked into a lot of the other kind of things that would take away from your ability to do what you really started out and what you wanted to do.
Considering the strength of the group, how were they treated by the officers and the other cadets on the base? Yeah.
Well, when you're a cadet and on a police, we didn't have, the only time we had type of intermingling with the other cadets was when we were at lunch. The lunch was a group kind of thing. But other than that, we were completely separate. We went to class, stayed in that same classroom all day, and we went back to our barracks at night, and about 3 or 4 nights a week we had night school. And after night school was out, we had to go in and do whatever studying we wanted to do that night and go to bed.
Did everyone in your class graduate? How many were there?
We started out with about 35, and 2 or 3 fellows didn't graduate in our navigation class.
Any particular reason?
No, you never know what it is. Some people say it's a quota kind of idea that they only want to take so many, and that particular kind of thing. One fellow had medical reasons, and one of them was, one of these kind of things, he was caught up in that particular kind of thing.
Now, when you completed your basic training, what unit were you assigned to?
Well, when we left the navigation school, the group was forming because they were training twin-engine pilots at Tuskegee, and they were training. They had one class of navigators that had been through, and they're training other fellows for bombardiering at other bases, and we were flying B-25s. The B-25 has a crew of 6, and the person has to do the navigation and the bombardiering. So they sent my entire class to a bombardiering school, and at the bombardiering school, we finished that course and got another rating. So we were what they call dual rated. We was rated as a navigator and also as a bombardier. Now the treatment at the bombardiering school was quite different from the navigation school because at the bombardiering school, we were officers, and it demanded, and we felt that way too, it demanded a lot different type of treatment. When we got there, the first thing that they wanted to do, they wanted us to eat with the cadets. We told them, no, we were officers. We want to eat in the officers' mess. And they said, well, you know, you're on a cadet school, you're on a cadet schedule and things. But we said, the men that are flying the airplanes are officers, and you're going to feed them, you can feed us too. That was one contention. They wanted us to march to class, because cadets always march from their barrack to the class. And we said, no, we won't march to class. We're officers, you tell us what time the class meets, we'll be there. We met that. Then after we were there for a short period of time, the thing that came up at many bases was about the use of the Officers Club. We started out with full use of the Officers Club, and in about 2 weeks we had a meeting. The commanding officer called a meeting and told us that we no longer could use the Officers Club. In the meantime, they would give us room service, and we could order from them and give us room service. And so we were restricted from there, I said, because there'd been some talk of violence and different kind of things happening. So we proceeded to write to everybody that we knew, the politicians, the NAACP, and all our congressmen and all those kind of things. And about 3 or 4 weeks later, we received another confirmation from the commanding officer telling us that we could go back and use the Officers Club again, and they changed the commanding officer at the base. He was sent someplace else. And we went and used the Officers Club, and we didn't have any more difficulty there about it. We also had a thing about the swimming pool. We got there like in July or August, and fellas went down and jumped in the swimming pool. The next day they drained the swimming pool, and all these subtle kind of things would go on, you know, all the time that you would see. One of the unusual things that happened at that particular base is that on the weekends, if a pilot wanted to take a plane and fly to some other city, he had to have a rated navigator, and we were the only rated navigators on the base, so they always had to come to us and ask us if we wanted to go with them so they could have a chance to go wherever they wanted to go. And also, one other thing happened there is that there was a navigation course, 3 or 4 week navigation course on the end of the bombardiering course. They wanted us to take that, and we told them that we would not take that particular course because we were already rated navigators, but we would teach the course for them and help them in that respect. And that's the way the things came. It was as I look back and think about it, everybody was so focused on things that, you know, that was any kind of discussion, but we just agreed on these kind of things. Here we are in a high-risk occupation. Why should we take anything but what we were supposed to have? And we just felt that way. And that's just the way we reacted to all these kind of things that came up for us. And we were able to do it and deal with it very successfully.
Now, was this the Freeman Field incident?
No, this wasn't the Freeman Field.
Well, what was your understanding and opinion about the Freeman Field incident? Because sort of similar.
We got shipped. We got through with the bombardiering school. We got shipped to Godman Field and joined the 477th. But the Godman Field was a small field. In fact, it was a part of Fort Knox. Mm-hmm. It was a very small field and was inadequate for the training for a bomber group. And so they moved us, the bomber group, up to Freeman Field in Indiana. And we went and joined in this particular group that went there. And we heard before we got there, because, you know, this is that contact that we have all the time, that they had 2 officers clubs there. They had taken the enlisted men's officers club and made it into a black officers club, and the other white officers club was still there. So nobody was using the black officers club. It was just there, vacant. So when we got there, you know, the fellows did some brainstorming and different kind of things, and so, you know, said, well, we're just going to go in the club. So fellows would started going in groups and would go into the club, and they would get arrested and sent back in quarters. And this happened until a number of maybe 150 or 60 got arrested this particular way. Then the thing that we found out, and maybe it's a little disconnected, 20 years later, that all these things that were happening, all the communication between the commanding officer and Freeman Field and the Pentagon, the highest people in the Air Force. There was a constant stream of information going back and forth. And it was all being recorded. We found out about this maybe 20 years after this incident was over. So they finally decided that what they would do would publish an base, like a little base order, saying what facilities were for trainees and what facilities were for permanent personnel and the instructor personnel. That broke down into a black and white thing, except that we had some doctors and things on the base that really were not trainees. We had some people back from overseas, and some fellows from the 99th were coming back already. They'd already made a tour of duty. So we weren't all trainees. And we went into the meeting. They read the article. Everybody had one. And they asked everybody, did they understand it and want to understand it? And so fellows left with that type of thing. And so the command officer heard that this wasn't working too well. So they decided to call each officer in and ask them to sign that they understood what this base order was all about. And in this course, and I have a transcript of my testimony, and it was the same for the other 101 fellows that refused to sign. They asked us, had we read it? We told them we had read it. They asked if we understand it. We said yes. They asked us to sign it, and we said that we didn't want to sign it. They said, scratch out what you don't want to sign and sign it. We said, no, we don't want to sign it. They said, write on the back why you don't want to sign it and sign it. And we said, no, we want to do that. And so we didn't want to sign. So then the next thing they had our commanding officer give us a direct order to sign. And in the time of war, when you fail to follow a direct order of your commanding officer, one of the things that the worst thing that can happen to you is you can be shot. And so 101 people refused to sign, and that's where they got the idea of the 101 in Freeman Field. 3 other people were arrested because they said they bumped the officer at the door. Of the 3 went to trial. Only 1 was convicted, and it came out that this was on his file. This incident, we immediately, the 101 of us would get what they call confined in quarters. We had to stay in our particular barrack, and we'd go out for meals and come back. We started the same thing again, writing to everybody that we knew, and the NAC got involved, sent us a lawyer. They shipped us back to Godman Field under in-quarters arrest. They had a fence up around the barracks that we were staying in. And the unusual thing about this thing is that German prisoners of war from Fort Knox were able to walk back and forth through our barrack. Here we are, officers and gentlemen, and this is the way that we are being treated. And after this went on for about a couple of weeks, the War Department finally found out through the legal thing that they were on the wrong side of this issue, and they better try to get out the best way they can. So they gave each of us what was called an official reprimand that went into our record. And one of the fellows that was in my class, Jimmy Warren, he started a campaign to get this thing rescinded. This was like maybe 8 or 9 years ago. He was almost 50 years old then. And so, and finally he got the government to rescind this order. It had been in our orders for 50 years. And that we were at a convention down in Atlanta, and they rescinded this thing that had been in order for 50 years. It was like any other thing that's like a bad evaluation that's placed in somebody's personnel file. And it would kept some of the fellows that stayed in the military from receiving the promotions that they should have received. The one fellow that was convicted wanted to be a lawyer, and since this was a felony, he could not be a lawyer. And when the government rescinded this thing, they said that this thing shouldn't have happened, and that was finally the outcome of that. When this happened, there were a lot of things involved in this besides the idea of us wanting to go to Officers Club. We had people coming back from overseas in the 99th that had all kinds of flying experience. They could not get promoted. They would, if a white officer would get promoted and leave, they'd bring another white officer in and put him in a promotion mill, and the fellows were just stuck. That was one of the other things that was happening there. That people were mistreated in the town and that particular kind of things too. But all these things were part of that Freeman Field incident that happened there. Then once we got back there at the base and they gave us our reprimand, they sent us to Walterboro, South Carolina. We were shipped into Walterboro, South Carolina. And it was down there, we were trying to get prepared to go overseas. We had brand new airplanes at Freeman Field. When we got back down to down in Walterboro, we got some of the oldest B-25s that the Army had at that time. And we stayed there. I stayed there until I was shipped back and was finally discharged in 1945.
Do you think that maybe the success of the 99th sort of had a negative impact on the guys that followed, especially with the white officers, you know, treating them maybe a little differently?
It's the effect of the 99th and the 332nd was tremendous. We run into people today, and they come up to us and say, "Oh, you're Tuskegee Airmen." I said, "Man, we're so glad to see you." And these guys might have been gunners or on these B-19s and planes, and guys who escort for them. He says, "We knew when you would come up to be our escort that we didn't have to worry about getting home that night." See, because the reason that they let the 332nd do this escort work is that they were losing about 40% of the bombers to enemy aircraft. And so they needed all the help they could get. And so they put the 332nd in to fly this kind of escort. And I think one of the reasons that the 332nd was so successful was not only the ability of the pilots, but from the direction that they received from, it's now General Davis. General Davis had finished West Point. And, you know, he went to this thing where they didn't speak to him for 4 years. And he was a strict disciplinarian. And he told the fellows that your job is to take the bombers in and bring them back. I don't want you running off somewhere trying to be an eagle, shooting down a lot of airplanes and things. You stay with the bombers. And that's what they did. And that's why they got the record of never losing a fighter, a bomber, to an enemy aircraft. And it'll never be broken.
Now, when they were losing 45% of the bombers, was it the case that did they have white escort?
Yes.
Were they going
Right.
out trying to shoot people
Yes.
down and leaving them?
Right. They would go off and shoot them down. And just like if, like the bombers may be taking off from over here somewhere, and the fighter planes are all stationed down here, and they would rendezvous someplace. And they would, at the rendezvous point, they would take them in over the target, then they would go up and wait for them to finish their bomb run, and then the fighters would pick them up again and take them back to their base. What was happening is, a lot of in the white squadrons, if the bombers were 10 or 15 minutes late, they wouldn't wait for them. You know, they say, well, I've got enough gas to get back, and if I wait for them 10 or 15 minutes, I got to really take a chance on whether or not I'll be able to get back. Well, our guys did that. They would stay, they'd wait for them. And these people really appreciated that once they found out who was actually doing it.
Did you ever serve overseas?
No.